Watching Newsfeed AM, let's pick up on developments in Sri Lanka now, where thousands of protesters have stormed the office of the Prime Minister in the capital, Colombo, as the government declares a state of emergency. Now, Sri Lanka has been marred by protests against the country's record-high inflation, resulting in non-availability of essential goods such as fuel and drastic food shortages. Demonstrators on Saturday stormed the presidential palace, forcing the president to announce that he will resign from his post today. Now, he has since fled the country to the Maldives just hours before his expected resignation. The Prime Minister of that country also expected to vacate his office after he also announced his resignation at the weekend. Now, the leaders of the protests have vowed to occupy the presidential palace until a new administration comes into office. All right, let's get more on the developments in Sri Lanka now, and we are joined by a journalist from that country, Shiran Ilan Peruma. Shiran, thank you very much for your time. Let's start with the reaction from the people of Sri Lanka on the news that the president has since fled to the Maldives. They expected him to resign today.
Yes, certainly. The president has said that he will be resigning today. I think there is a lot of anticipation and a lot of excitement for this moment. Certainly the protests that we've seen the past couple of months, the key demand, perhaps one could argue that one of the only demands really is for the president to go, to essentially resign in response to the economic mismanagement and the galloping inflation that has really pummeled people across classes in Sri Lanka, especially in the urban sector, however. So I think we are yet to see a formal resignation. The latest update I've seen is a confirmation that the president will be resigning and will be sending a letter of resignation to the Speaker of Parliament.
Yeah, there's also news that the Prime Minister intends to resign, or has he announced his own resignation, which then leaves us with the question, who is in charge of the country at the moment?
Right. So I'm not a constitutional expert, but what I do gather is that in the event that the president resigns, power transfers then to the Prime Minister. And if the Prime Minister also resigns, then I believe temporarily that would go to the Speaker of Parliament. The Prime Minister has said that he will resign. Again, things are up in the air, and for the past couple of months, we've heard so many conflicting statements. We've had both President and Prime Minister say one thing and then do another. So I think most Sri Lankans are probably just on edge, waiting to see what will happen and whether they will follow through. In either case, if both the President and the Prime Minister resign, we will have to see some sort of interim government. So there will have to be a movement within Parliament to elect an interim Prime Minister. Ideally, it would be the leader of the opposition that takes up that role. Of course, the opposition has a minority in Parliament right now, so there would have to be some sort of negotiation process to have an all-party interim government until elections can be called.
Yeah, Shiran, I suppose it's fair to characterize the situation in your country as fluid right now, and this is all about the rising cost of living, which the citizens of that country are saying the current administration has simply failed to manage this. Whoever comes in, that's going to be a very difficult task to fix.
Certainly. So Sri Lanka at the moment has essentially no foreign exchange reserves. We've defaulted on our debt. There are shortages of fuel. So if you walk out to the streets of Colombo, anywhere in Sri Lanka right now, you'll see massive queues going on for 2, 3, maybe more kilometers of rickshaws, trucks, buses, all without fuel. So the entire domestic supply chain has collapsed. So what started out as a sort of imported inflation due to the devaluation of the currency has now also translated into a complete collapse of domestic output, right? So If you go to a supermarket now, there's very few vegetables, for example. So it's going to be very difficult to fix. I think Sri Lanka was relying for a while on India for bridge financing, but with the political instability and without any real lack of progress in negotiations with the IMF, it is very unclear what will happen in the coming weeks.
Yeah. Let's try and, I suppose, put a human face to this story, Shiran. You are a citizen of that country. How does it make you feel when you see things develop the way that they are? Do you think that, you know, your country, or do you think that you have a future in that country?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question to ask anyone in Sri Lanka right now. I would say that the main feeling that I personally feel is anxiety because, you know, in a situation like this, especially for the middle class that really takes for granted some of the luxuries that they have, you know, just the routine everyday 9-to-5 job and all of that. You know, all of that just goes out the window in a situation like this where you don't really know what's going to happen minute to minute, right? You don't know whether you're going to be able to access transport, to access fuel or food, and essentials like that. You don't know when the lights are going to go off, or you know, who's going to be leading your country in the next 10-15 minutes. So yeah, anxiety is, I guess, how I would describe it, and a lot of nervous tension, I think.
And is there a way to tell at the moment, Shiran, where the latest developments are going to come? Because, as you say, things are pretty fluid right now. You're not exactly sure who's in charge of the country, but if both the President and the Prime Minister intend resigning, then the Speaker of Parliament immediately takes charge. But that doesn't seem to have been, I suppose, properly communicated. You're simply relying on what legislation dictates. So what's the next step?
So this has been somewhat of a criticism of the protest movement, because from the beginning it has fixated itself on the president resigning, and there hasn't been, I think, enough of a well-formulated idea of what comes next. And we are basically in that moment. So these protests, it appears to be that their demands will be met. You know, hopefully within the day. It does seem like the president will resign, and then perhaps the prime minister as well. As I said earlier, the question of what happens next, ideally, it would be an all-party interim government. Now, there has been talk about this for a very long time. In fact, going back to the first COVID outbreak, there were dissenters within President Gotabaya's own coalition who were arguing that due to the economic situation, it would be very useful to have some sort of all-party mechanism so that there could be a national consensus on how these challenges will be dealt with. Unfortunately, that wasn't done. So a couple of years later, we're back to the same solution, some sort of national consensus based on an all-party interim government mechanism.
Yeah, well, a very worrying situation indeed, the developments in Sri Lanka. Let me thank you very much for your time. Shiran Ilan Peruma is a journalist operating in that country.